All right, so welcome everybody to the Divine Mercy University Spiritual Direction Certificate Program, webinar rather. My name is Greg Shapiro. I'm the admissions advisor for the SDC program. And today we're going to be looking at the details and what to expect in the program. And we'll go through some slides just as a visual aid. But with me today is Janet Scanlan. She is a faculty member. She's also alumni, and it's just a pleasure having her with me. So Janet, if you could just introduce yourself for a moment and share a bit about yourself, that would be great.
Great. Thanks, Greg. It's good to be here. Hi, everybody. Thanks for being here. Just a little bit about me. I am a middle-aged Marylander here. I grew up in the Midwest, but I've been in Maryland here for about 30 years, raising a family, mom of 4, grandmom of 5 and counting. Have been in spiritual direction myself for close to 8 to 10 years and really felt the nudge to start in the program and had the glorious benefit of being, we call ourselves the pioneers. I think they call us the first cohort to go through the program, but I had been home raising kids. I had been doing a lot of ministry work and really just felt a nudge that God was asking something more. So kind of stepped into the unknown. It was a brand new program, but what a blessing it was in my life and the friendships that we've made and the spiritual growth has just been phenomenal. And I'm here to recommend it wholeheartedly.
Great, excellent. Thank you, Janet. So again, we're going to cover all the details as we're going through the webinar. But before we dive into all the information, I would like to just start by asking you a few questions because you have a lot of experience with this program, and like you said, you were part of the first cohort back in 2019, I believe it was.
Correct.
So that's great. The first thing that I was curious about, if you could share, what drew you specifically to this program? There are other spiritual direction programs out there, but why DMU's spiritual direction program in particular?
Yeah, that's a great question. And when I started back in January of 2019, there were several programs up and running that were credible. And I looked at them all. Some were closer to home, some were not. The thing that drew me to this program, several things. One was primarily the flexibility. It was online. It was in your own home, at your own pace. But there was also this peer learning community. So I was in classes with very holy, wonderful, talented people, men and women, lay and consecrated, the religious. It was a beautiful community. And I had no experience with online learning. So it was a little intimidating, but I was pleasantly surprised at how easy they really made it. One of the other things that really drew me to the program was that I knew people who had gone through just DMU, the psychology programs and the counseling programs. And I felt very strong that they were teaching truth. I grew up, kind of came of age in that post-Vatican II era where some things in the church were a little foggy for in many ways. And I wanted truth. I wanted to know what I was getting was the truth. I wanted solid church teaching and to know that the psychology even that I was learning was going to be vetted. And the DMU community with the background of the legionary priest and just the Regnum Christi people that were involved, I felt that it was a perfect match and I couldn't have been more pleased.
Great, very good. I've noticed that too, that I think for a lot of people, their attraction to the program, one is the flexibility that it's online and it's asynchronous. So they can log into their classes, their modules at whatever time works in their schedule. But on top of that, just that human development component really sets us apart from so many other programs, and it really does equip them for when they're working with different directees, including those that might have maybe a background within their own trauma or mental health, and how to speak to that with empathy and as spiritual directors, not as therapists, but with that empathy that's really required for that. So
absolutely. The human part of it is so key, right? Where all of our life is relationships, and just having the DMU therapists and the counselors and the PsyDs teaching and counseling and walking with us was so huge. Just in the relationships that we have with our directees, but really in so many of our relationships, just in life in general. So it was really invaluable.
Yeah, great, very good. So along with that, I mean, what has been your experience as a student? Because now you're faculty, but what was your experience like? You shared a little bit of that, but just generally, when you were in the program in the very first cohort, how has that experience been for you?
Well, I tell you, all of us who stepped into it back when it was brand new were a little bit nervous, to say the truth. Most of us had not been in school for many years. So putting a virtual backpack on was a little bit intimidating, but it was nice to be together with others who were stepping into that online program for the first time. So it was a little bit intimidating, but quickly it became, and the word I'll use is exhilarating. It was so amazing to go back to school and to realize that, wow, I can do this from my own home on my own schedule. And just this incredible world opened up of online learning, which was exhilarating and confidence building and really kind of reaffirming too. And I think people who are on the webinar right now, they're being called in some way to at least think about it, to pursue it, right? They're discerning. And it does, when you step into it, it's kind of reaffirming in knowing that God has been kind of pulling you in this path for a while. We don't always understand all the twists and turns, but it was very confirming that he had been preparing those of us who joined, and myself included, that, yep, it's time. Also, I should say that it's a little bit humbling, and humbling in a good way, because it, is a lot of personal growth, a lot of self-awareness, which is, all growth is painful, but you take a good long look at yourself and the narrative of your own life, and the growth is astounding, but it's a little bit humbling to kind of step into that and think, wow, can I do this? Can I be back in school, in my early 60s with people from all over who, it's a little bit intimidating, but in the end, exhilarating and confidence building and just really reaffirming.
Yeah, that's great. I'll even use that as just to piggyback on what you just said as an opportunity to share with all the guests that, if there are any questions about moving forward, as you're in it, any sort of hiccups you're running into, whatever those might be, I always encourage the students that if they're running into whatever curveballs life is throwing at them, to reach out to us as their support, whether it's with the staff, with student success, with their faculty, their instructors. Let us know what's going on. I found that for many of them, there could be maybe ways in which we can help you in succeeding and thriving in the program. I'll even just use one quick example. I was working with an applicant back in this past fall, and she was ready to start. She really wanted to start for the fall, but she called me up and said, Greg, I think I need to defer because the week that I start class is also the week that I'm taking my daughter to college. And so it's going to be very difficult for me to handle that first week while also being present for my daughter. And so I asked her if she mentioned this to her instructor yet. And she said, not yet. I didn't plan on it. I just figured I should defer. And so I said, why not reach out to your instructor just to let her know, just in case. And so she did. And the instructor was very accommodating. She gave her the information, I believe a week early or 2 weeks early, whatever it was. But they worked together to make sure that she had the content needed so that she could just work ahead, so that she could be there for her daughter, but still starting the program when she wanted to. So again, I just use that as an example. It's always case by case, but whatever we can do within our capability to accommodate the student to see their growth and their thriving in the program, we always want to do what we can.
And I'll echo that as well. When I started in the first class, the SDC 100, through kind of a glitch in emails and things, I didn't even know that I was accepted until about a week after the program started. So by that point, you're a little bit nervous already. My professor, Dr. Murphy, couldn't have been more kind and more accommodating and more gracious, and just so so uplifting and just kind of helped me kind of wiggle my way up to where everybody else was. And it was really kind of that first taste of, wow, they really do care about you here as a person, and know that it's not easy for all of us to kind of step into a new platform and a new venue. But yeah, they couldn't be more accommodating.
Great, good. So now that you're faculty, as a faculty member, as an instructor, what do you enjoy most of all about teaching this subject matter to the students?
So I should say that my part as on the faculty is I'm helping with the residencies. So part of the program, as you well know, we have 2 4-day residencies over in Virginia, wonderful on site, and they're you finally get to meet the people that you've been in classes with. It's a lot of hands-on. It's a real growth experience. And so I've been helping with those, predominantly with the first one, the SDC 300, which is kind of that midway course. It's kind of the bread and butter of our course, and just such a great course. But one of my favorite parts is really watching what God does in people's lives. You know, you kind of step into this a little bit cautiously, thinking, I really don't know if I can do this. I'm not sure if this is where the Lord wants me. And boy, oh boy, once you take that first step in, people get comfortable. And I just see the personal growth that happens in these 4-day residencies. That's really amazing. You know, people are nervous to be together. They're excited. They're a little bit cautious, but the joy that happens, the healing in people's lives that hasn't even been planned. Personally, you really get to know these people and kind of get to know a little bit of their stories. And honestly, just the explosion of grace in people's lives because of the program. That's probably been my favorite thing as a faculty member.
Yeah, that's great. It's interesting because when the students come here to campus for their residencies, the first thing I'll mention that even though it's online, there's still a camaraderie between the students, even before the residencies happen. They still have that community that you would want to see in a program. But it's especially interesting when you see them come together for the residencies, because it's basically their first time actually getting to see each other face to face, even though they've known each other through the discussion boards and going through the program together. But it always seems like they're, like you said, they're basically coming into their own. They're now putting the skills and knowledge into practice in this sort of live setting. And when I was speaking with a student, she mentioned how it gave her so much more confidence that she's like, I can actually do this. I can actually speak it out loud with people. And she felt way more, I guess, reaffirmed in that God was calling her to this ministry because of that experience.
Absolutely. The residencies are so energizing. You know, the first one, you're a little bit timid, and we had the the benefit of the first one that I went to was it was before COVID. And so we were in person and it was lovely. You're finally meeting these people that you have been in classes with, and you really get to see them in real life, and you get to hug them and you get to shake hands, and they're real life people, and it's wonderful. And our second residency was after COVID. So it was virtual. And even that, the learning was still phenomenal, you know, because you think, well, but we're not together. But it still works. So all the virtual of the classes, and that was kind of a hesitation of mine in the beginning, thinking, how well does this work virtually? And, you know, now the whole world is virtual, right? But back pre-COVID, it was a little bit intimidating. I really want to be in classes with these people. But, you know, the virtual classroom, it really does work. And then when you get to meet the people in person, it's just the best of both. So.
Excellent. And I mean, you may have already answered this, but just your experience either as an instructor or as a student, what have you found to be the most helpful thing about this program?
Wow. Things I mentioned, confidence building, reaffirming. You need to sit on that fence for a while, thinking, Lord, is this what you're calling me to? But boy, once you kind of put that car you take it out of park, right, and put it into drive, and the Lord starts moving you, it just feels right. And that was reaffirming. But I'll tell you, probably for me, the most helpful has been just self-knowledge, self-awareness. And that's a benefit to anybody at any time in their lives, right? But you take a good long look at your life and you look at things like, how do I listen to people? You know, I think we all think we go into it thinking, well, I am a good listener, but boy, oh boy, through the program and the skills from the therapists and things, you really realize, wow, I could be a better listener. And you look at things like, what am I attached to? Am I empathetic? What are my fears? What are my triggers, right? We all have this human side of us that we're bringing in, but it's that growth in self-knowledge and self-awareness that you see yourself, you know where you're at, you improve, you're giving yourself some tools now to work on your personal self. And it deepens all the relationships of your life, just in knowing more so who you are, how you're made. The strengths and weaknesses that God has given you, right, are all part of our story. But I can't overemphasize those human relating skills. You know, those come in handy, whether it's with your husband or your grandkids or the neighbors. And we all need to be better at communicating, right? We live in a virtual world. And people, sometimes relationships, we're not as good at putting the time and the energy into relationships. You know, am I a good listener and things? So it's probably that self-awareness and the self-knowledge. It was really just a beautiful gift.
Mm. Yeah, you know, and I'll even just along with that, I've you know, one thing that we tell students, especially those that are in their discernment phase, is we point out to them that the first 3 courses, which are very beneficial for spiritual direction, they're also designed to help people in coming to a conclusion in their discernment phase. And so now and then we'll have students that start the program, and by the end of the 3rd course, they've actually discerned out and they've realized that God has called them to a different ministry.
Mm-hmm.
But the benefit of the benefits and the fruits of what they've learned for those 3 courses are still applied within those other ministries. So it's not like it's been all for naught, but rather it's actually given them more clarity, and they can take what they've learned in those 3 courses and apply it in this new direction that God has pointed them to.
Oh, amen. I've even told people just that I've met in direction or just in my other work in my ministries that some of the courses are worth just taking just for the course, whether it's auditing a certain course on SDC 200 is a lot about attachments, and we all are attached to things that some we don't even know about. But just even auditing that class tells you a whole lot about yourself. It's kind of like being in spiritual direction or in therapy kind of throughout the whole program, because it's so much growth in self-knowledge and self-awareness and why we do what we do. It's really kind of amazing what we can learn about ourselves, even later in life, right? We're always kind of a mystery to ourselves, but it's just a beautiful gift to be able to say, oh, that's how I am. That's how God made me. And I can always do better. So it's a real gift.
Yeah. So, excuse me. So along with that, I mean, you shared your favorite parts about the program and a lot of the fruits and benefits from it. Looking back, especially your experience as a student, what have you found to be perhaps the most challenging parts of the program as you were going through it?
Well, that's a good question, because looking back, it's always easy. You kind of just remember the good. So thinking about what might have been challenging, you know, honestly, in the beginning, I think for a lot of us, and depending on the age of people when they start the program, the computer stuff can be a little bit intimidating to people, right? Can I do this? Can I figure this out? And the answer is yes. If I can do it, anybody can do it. And the help that you get is wonderful, but it's a little bit intimidating, right? If you've been out of school for many years, as I had. So that was a little bit intimidating. And maybe something else kind of on the same lines as being challenging is taking that good long look at yourself and thinking, okay, you notice people who I'll say don't listen well. So one of the keys of the whole program in spiritual direction, in life in general, you know, having a spiritual life is, can I listen? Am I able to listen to God? Am I able to listen to God in others? Or are my listening skills, right? And again, we need those in marriage and parenting and all those things. But once you get some of these tools, which are great gifts, you do notice things like, oh, that spouse of mine, I wish they were a better listener. Or you look at yourself and think, Lord, am I really listening to you? So it's a good and a bad that you see, yes, I want some skills and I am learning to be a better listener and more empathetic, but boy, I'm not perfect. And I really notice when other people kind of let me down too. So it's kind of a funny situation.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I've, and I like to just share with each student that I speak with that just like any program, there's always going to be obstacles, and getting to the very end is, it's always I hate to say fight, but I'll say fight for lack of a better term, because you're really pushing forward and you're putting effort and you're committing time and energy into the program. But I mean, you gain so much out of it, and you gain the knowledge. You're confident in being a spiritual director and serving others. And I think the other thing is that if God has called you to this, then who are we to say no if we want to be obedient? For a lot of people, they come to this because they have heard God say, now's your time to move forward into this. And I'll speak to one more thing that you mentioned, which was just the technology, that hurdle. Now and then I'll speak with students and they'll say, I'm 61 years old, or I'm 70 years old, and so I'm not going to be the same as the other, the 22-year-olds that are in the program. And I chuckle a little bit, because I'd say the majority of the students I've seen come into this, or maybe, and some of them are in their 30s and 40s, but I'd say the majority I've seen come in are maybe 50, 60, even in their 70s. And many of them are retiring into spiritual direction. And I think the reason why, I've actually put a lot of thought into it, and just speaking with many of them, I think for many of them, spiritual direction is, there's benefit to having life experience when offering spiritual direction. And that's something that God gives each person as they're continuing, later on in life. And that's something they can offer to others, not just with the skills and knowledge that they're learning in the program, but just their personal experience. And I think that's why so many people that are maybe 50 plus go into this program, and why they're so attracted to it.
Absolutely. And don't underestimate, I'll talk to the people out there on the webinar, don't underestimate the wisdom that you have in the years that you've lived. I mean, that's priceless, right? You can't put a price tag on that. And I think that's why God does call people kind of in those middle years. You've had your career, your first career, you've raised some kids, you've got a lot of street smarts and wisdom, and you've been paying attention to the Lord working in your life. And it's just kind of the next step, a continuation, but it's a really beautiful flowering of, you step into it thinking, okay, well, I have a little bit of wisdom and God's calling me, but boy, then he just kind of overwhelms you, right? He won't be outdone in generosity. And you think you're kind of giving, and the things that you get from the program are just really amazing.
Yeah. And I mean, those of us that are receiving spiritual direction, we really value that. That's something that we appreciate from spiritual directors. Just the fact that they do have that life experience, so that they can help us wrap our heads around what God is speaking to us, because they've gone through that in their lives as well.
Yeah, that accompaniment, that Pope Francis is always talking about, it really is key. Again, the director is really the Lord, right? The Holy Spirit, but it's that accompanying somebody in that beautiful place of with their relationship with the Lord is a gift for us as directors to be able to say, wow, I'm going to walk with you. And the vulnerability and the growth that happens is just kind of amazing to everybody in the room at the sessions, of how God shows up and kind of works in people's lives. So it's a real joy. Yeah.
Great. Now, Janet, you may have already answered this, but I'll ask just in case if there's more to it. But what has surprised you most of all about from your experience in the program?
Well, well, some silly little things, how quickly it goes, really, honestly, and how much you do know once you kind of get into it. But I think probably overall is how this program touches all areas of your life. So, I think when you step into it, you think, okay, is God calling me to be a spiritual director? And great, that's certainly a part of it. But the classes and the knowledge and the wisdom and the experiences really all parts of your life, right? I had a wise priest tell me at one point that everything connects on the spiritual level, and when you go through the program and the classes and the learning, right, you're going up a learning curve. It benefits all of your relationships in your life. You're not just a better listener, you're kind of a more whole person. You've paid attention to the Lord. You've gotten some human skills, some narrative. You've worked on your spiritual life, and it touches all parts of your life. So it's not just when you're wearing that spiritual director hat. It's really it's all aspects of your life, kind of that total person, and that's kind of a beautiful thing, right? To be that wholeness and that harmony of all the things that we've been given in the class, that you can see them working in places in your life where you never would have thought that skill could translate into the talks that you're given at church on a Tuesday morning or something like that. But it does, just the skills and the wisdom, it kind of all comes together and really affects all of your relationships.
Yeah, I mean, that makes a lot of sense to me. And I remember last summer when we had a cohort here for the residency. So I like to just have little chats during lunch with the students just to learn about them and get to see how they're doing in the program. And I spoke with one, and I asked her what she found so beneficial about the program so far as she's been going through it. And one thing she mentioned, and I didn't think of this, but it made a lot of sense, was how her relationship with her own spiritual director was even deeply enriched by her going through this. She got to know a lot more about herself. She got to know how to better communicate with her spiritual director. She got to understand a little bit more about the questions that her spiritual director was asking her, because she now had a better sense of where these questions were coming from. So it enriched that relationship. It allowed her to receive direction in a richer way. And for that, I think that's also even more so preparing her to serve so well as a spiritual director to others. So that's one of the other great things that I've seen with the students that have been going through this.
And I think everybody that I know that goes through this says that exact same thing. I am so much a better directee because I've sat on that other side. I've paid attention. I've kind of walked in their shoes, and it makes you appreciate the process and kind of how it works. It gives you some spiritual awareness that you didn't have before. It helps you to understand the benefits of the vulnerability, right? That sometimes it's very hard, and you kind of have to tiptoe into that. But it makes you a little bit more honest and open to be able to say that, if I can't share with my director, I'm probably not going to be able to share these things with the Lord. And it kind of opens up that place in you to be able to be kind of a little bit more vulnerable, because you see the process that God wants to shed light wherever it is. And it does. It makes you a better directee. One of the other areas that I notice it in is my husband and I do a lot of work with marriage prep. We have for about 30 years. And, every probably once a month for a weekend, we'll do talks, whether it's communications or temperaments or giving and receiving love. And that's kind of been our ministry. But taking this class and being kind of certified as a spiritual director has really helped in the talks that we give. And it's so interesting to see the young people coming in who, anybody born after 1997, they're these digital natives, I think they call them. And, their whole life has been technology. And relationships don't come, I'll say, as easily, because they're tied to a lot of the equipment, right? The social media, the phones. And so relationships, there's some groundwork that needs to be laid in relationships. And my experience in the program has helped me to kind of better help them learn about relationships, learn about the vulnerability and the honesty and the triggering and all those human things that happen in all of our relationships, but particularly people, young people and people preparing for marriage. It's just huge. And they're so grateful for the listening tools and understanding relationships, right? Because all of our life is built on relationships. And that's been a very beautiful gift in my life as well.
Great, very good. One other question I have for you, and then I'd love to just share all the details with students. But again, thank you so much for answering these questions for me. So what advice would you give to every guest that we have here, anybody that's looking into this program? What advice would you give them as they're looking into this program?
The first thing I'd say, obviously, is to pray. And I'm sure they all are. If they've gotten this far, if they're coming to a webinar, they're feeling that nudge, pray about it, right? The Lord, if there's that desire there, the Lord's going to answer it. He wants to answer it. So pray. But maybe my next tip would be just take the first next step, right? There's no harm in taking a first class or in filling out an application. But sometimes we can discern for a long time in life. And, we hate to get to the end of our life and have those regrets. Woulda, coulda, shoulda. I wish I'd have done this. I wish I'd have tried this. And the worst that can happen, you take the class. Maybe you find that God has called you someplace different. Great. What you've learned in the class, the friendships that you've made, the connections, the doors that God has opened that you couldn't have possibly imagined wouldn't have happened if you hadn't said yes. So I'd say maybe take that next first step and don't spend too much time discerning, right? Because some of us, myself included, there are professional fence sitters, right? You can sit on that fence and kind of go, oh, it's not perfect. I don't really know. I wish I could have that whole path kind of lit up for me. And who is it? I think it's John Henry Newman that talks about the Lord just puts the light on the next step sometimes. And maybe this is the next step. The fact that people are here listening to the webinar, they're feeling something. Great. Take that next first step. Pray about it. Maybe apply. Maybe you talk to somebody in the program, but maybe you just kind of start out and say, okay, Lord, I'm going to move in this direction until I feel you calling me someplace else. And again, he's not going to give you all the steps. He's not going to take you all the way through everything and give you that crystal ball of what life is going to be like 5 years down the road as a spiritual director. But he is going to take you step by step through the program. So I'd say, do yourself a favor. It's so much personal growth and so much self-awareness that you can't go wrong. So pray and maybe take the first next step.
Yeah, great. And I'll even share for all the guests here that, and we'll go through all the details, but for those of you that did want to take that next step of applying, we can waive the fee for you. We'll make sure it's a free application. And I'll share with you how we can do that. So, with that, why don't we just go through all the details of the program? That way, exactly, for all the guests, you'll know exactly what to expect and how the program works. And Janet, if you have any thoughts, any insight into the details as I'm going through it, please feel free to weigh in on that. That would be helpful. And also for all the guests, as questions are coming to you as I'm going through the information, drop those questions in the Q&A or in the chat, and Janet and I are here to answer those questions for you. So, we talked about the mission of the school, what makes this program so unique, and just preparing students for the capability to serve as spiritual directions. But looking at the activity as a student, so we had mentioned that there's 6 courses in the program and they're done online. So there's flexibility there. And they're also done asynchronously. For many students, I ask, are you familiar with the term synchronous versus asynchronous? Many of them, this is their first time learning about this phrase, but I think it's probably been more common since so many things are now done online. Synchronous would be an example of that, is where you have a group of students that are logging into Zoom for their class. So we typically imagine them all on screen with their instructor, and they're meeting at a specific time for a certain amount of time together. In this program, it's a little bit differently. It's done asynchronously. So this means as a student, you can log into your class at any time that works within your schedule. And there might be some moments where you have groups where you're meeting at certain times that you all coordinate with, but officially the formatting is done asynchronously. So that means you can log into your classes at whatever time works for you. You'll still have your assignments, your modules. You'll still have deadlines for your assignments, but it's up to you as far as when you want to sit down and attack that work. So the other thing is that while all the 6 courses are done online, there are also a couple of face-to-face components. One would be the 2 4-day residencies, and we'll go into the logistics of that in a moment. The other would be the 60 practicum hours. And this is actually very, I think, beneficial part, because this is where it's boots on the ground, where you get to now serve as a spiritual director as you're completing the program. And in the program, we're preparing students on how to make those connections, how to find directees to work with, so you're not left stranded. But this is a great way for you to now begin this process, start your ministry as a spiritual director and working with people. And you'll also have your instructors that will serve as supervisors. So you can, you'll talk with them about your successes. You'll go through how the spiritual direction is going, what you're going through, what sort of things are coming up in that. Of course, leaving names out because of confidentiality. But this way they can help navigate you through this process. And if there are any hiccups taking place during the practicum, they can help navigate you through that as well. So the next thing would be, these are the 6 courses I just wanted to share with you very briefly. And these are sequential, so you're going in order and you're taking 1 course at a time. Each course lasts for 8 weeks. And I'll just point out for a moment, and you can look at on the website, we have the course descriptions as well. But I'll point out for a moment, SDC 300, the 3rd course, and SDC 500, the 5th course. Janet mentioned that her role is primarily working with residencies for 300. But this is where the first residency happens. And that happens during week 7 of those 8 weeks in that course. And I think looking at the time frame, that's about 9 or 10 months from when you start the program. So there's a lot of time between when you begin and when your first residency falls. So that gives you time to let your families know, let your employer know, let your superior know, whoever it is, so that you can prepare for those 4 days on campus. And the 5th course, that's where the 2nd residency falls as well. But that also, that residency serves as a launch into your practicum hours. So your practicum begins during the 5th course. So again, we'll make sure that you have plenty of time to prepare for that process as well. Now, we talked a lot about the residencies, but I'll just share for a moment about how this works. So again, they happen during the 3rd and 5th course. They happen on campus. We're in Sterling, Virginia. If you're not familiar with the area, I live in DC, and it takes me about 35 minutes to get from home to campus. So that's around the distance. But we're about a 5-minute drive from Dulles Airport. Just to give you an idea, when I'm on campus and I need to go to the post office, I'll just go to Dulles because it's the nearest one and it's the most convenient. So it's right around the corner. So for those of you that would be flying in, you'd be coming in through Dulles. There'd be a shuttle that would pick you up and take you to your hotel. And students are lodged at a Marriott hotel just around the corner. It's walking distance. So we keep everything in very close proximity. One other thing I'll mention, by the way, is now and then I'll get questions from students and they'll ask, and this is them speaking, what if I can't make the residency because I have a wedding or I have a surgery that's planned, or some other event that's planned that's going to happen during these residencies. If something like that happens, I always tell them that's fine. Life still goes on. And if it's something like that, and making sure that you're at your son or daughter's wedding or whatever, surgeries are very important. If it's something like that, take a leave of absence. You can always pause the program if you absolutely need to. It just means that you're pausing it, you're not withdrawing. But then when you're ready to jump back in, you would get reinstated and you'd pick up from where you left off. And there are residencies happening at every term. So it's not like you'll have to wait until a full year from when you were initially going to do it. You'll just pick up from where you left off. Anything you wanted to add, Janet?
Yeah, the flexibility, as you mentioned, is so key. I know many people who would start the program, something happened, a child had something happen, as you mentioned, a wedding or an illness, and the flexibility in being able to stop, pause, as you say, and start back up. I know many people who have had to take advantage of that, and it's fine. You end up then having friends in two different cohorts when you restart again. So it's a win-win, but it's a great gift to be able to pause when you need to.
Yeah, great. Very good. I appreciate you sharing that. So the time commitment, I know this is a big part for many of you, making sure that you can actually commit to it while you still have your responsibilities and your, being there for your family or being there within your ministry or whatever it may be. So just looking at that a little bit deeper, we had mentioned that you're only taking one course per 8-week term. Along with that, usually, this isn't set in stone, but the courses are designed to take somewhere between 6 to 9 hours per week, more or less. So I would suggest, if you're looking into this, see if that's something that you can do, and maybe being on the more conservative side, if you could spare 9 hours per week. If there's a lot going on, see where you can make that time. Another thing is just having your family, having your community, whatever it is, see if there's any sort of support with that. I always tell students that if they're concerned about, the responsibilities they have, but if they just needed a little bit of help in order to make sure those things were covered while still being able to go through the program, ask that community that you're surrounded by, just so that you can make this possible. Another thing worth mentioning is that there are breaks between every course that you're taking. So once you complete an 8-week course, you go into a break that lasts between 6 to 10 weeks. It depends on where we are in the academic calendar as far as how many weeks it will be. But these breaks have been very beneficial for students for a number of reasons. One is that it gives students the ability to take a step back and reflect on the content that they're learning and just better absorb that information. Another thing is that the major holidays happen during the breaks, so you're not having to juggle Thanksgiving week or Christmas week or Holy Week with assignments, but rather you can just put your focus into those joyful occasions and those moments where we need to reflect on God more. And the last thing is that it's a pay-as-you-go program, and we'll look at the cost in a moment, but the way that payment works is students are paying course by course. And so having these breaks gives students a chance to come up for air, to breathe more and replenish their funds as they're going through it. So it makes it even more affordable for them. And so for the whole program, with the breaks and the courses together, it ends up taking about 2 years to complete. So looking at the cost, and I'll also preface, there could be room to reduce this cost that you're looking at per course. If you wanted to talk about that with me one-on-one, I'd be happy to go through the details. But as a baseline, the cost per course is $778. Again, you're paying that one at a time. You're not having to pay one. Well, you're not paying for the 2 years in one lump sum, but you're paying as you go. So it's $778 per course, and then per residency it's $1,000, and that'll cover your lodging, it'll cover your meals, it'll cover your materials. So the only thing that you're responsible for would be your travel. Another thing I'll mention, the way that the funding goes, just to carry on with that, is students are invoiced about, I think it's about a week or two before each class begins. And then you have 30 days to pay that balance. But that gives you time to, if you wanted to pay it in increments within those 30 days, or if you wanted to just pay it all upfront within those 30 days, either one would be fine. Now, as far as applications go, and we have a start date coming up. We have 3 start dates per year. Right now, we're looking at the summer term, and that's going to start on May 24th. And I'll share very briefly, this is the perfect time to apply for it for a number of reasons. And one of them being that the sooner you apply, that will give you more room to enter into the program being accepted earlier, but more so that'll give you more time to do your orientation. And I found that students that complete their orientation in advance, they're able to thrive way more in their first class because they've been able to take their time with it. They don't have to sit down for the 3 hours at a time, but they can break it up into, half hours during the day. And then also they're not having to juggle the orientation and their first course right at the very beginning, but they've already gotten through that orientation. So that's the best advice I could give someone that's looking to start. I guarantee you're going to feel way more comfortable if you get that step completed early. But when it comes to the application, it's fairly simple. There's only 3 steps. And the first step is the application form. And it's a short form. It's not a standard college application. This is something you could probably get through within 10 minutes. And we can waive the fee for you. There's a code at the bottom in that red box. So if you're looking to apply and if you'd like to do that, you can go to the website and apply, or you can reach out to me. I'd be happy to send you all the information. So the application would be the first step. The second step would be getting your recommendations. So one would need to come from your spiritual director that you've been working with. You have to have been working with a spiritual director for at least a year within the past 3 years. But if you currently have a spiritual director, then one would have to come from your spiritual director. And then another one would come from your pastor or your superior, whichever it may be. And the third one could come from pretty much anyone that knows you well, with the exception of it being a family member. So it could be a friend, it could be someone at your parish, in your apostolate, a colleague, really anyone that knows you well. And then once we have these first 2 steps done, the final step would be a group interview. And this happens over Zoom. It would be you along with a few other applicants. And you're not there to compete for a seat. You're just there to demonstrate to the 2 faculty members that will be facilitating it your interpersonal skills and your listening skills, and just a chance for them to get to know you more. And it only goes for an hour. And then once that's done, they'll come to a conclusion on your admission status, and we would let you know the very next day. So very short application process, one that takes people typically 1 to 2 weeks to complete, very simple. And again, I'm also here to support you through that process should you have any questions. So that brings us to the end. This is my contact information. So again, if you have any questions about the program, if you wanted to go through this information with me one-on-one, I'm here for that. I'm always happy to answer any questions that I can. And so with that, I'll open up the floor to all of you that are here to learn about the program in case you have any questions for me or for Janet. I'll give you a moment. Sometimes it takes a moment to come up with those questions. And Janet, if there's anything else that you'd like to share that we haven't covered, just to help the students in figuring out if this is the right program for them, anything you'd like to share at all would be great.
One of the things that struck me is when you were going through the program, the breaks in between the classes, the pace of the classes just in general, it works. It works in your life. It's not overwhelming. The 6 to 9 hours a week, that's about it. Some weeks are 6-hour weeks, and other weeks, if you're reading some of the optional material, or 9 hours a week. But it doesn't feel like homework. It feels like life and working on your relationship with God. So it doesn't really feel as academic as it might sound on paper. Those breaks in between the classes are so key. Lots of we're given so much material and information, and some of it, as I mentioned, is optional. And those breaks in between the classes gives you lots of times to just do some leisure reading and learn some things for your personal growth. And it's just a real gift. And then having the holidays free from being in school, just the whole timing of the program works. And honestly, to be done in those 2 years, several of the programs that I looked at, and I still think that they were more like 3 years that had a little bit more of an intense schedule, some demands that I didn't think were necessary. And this program, by far and away, makes sense in your life because it doesn't go on for too long. You're immediately after those classes, as you mentioned in the 5th class, you're starting your practicum, you're starting to direct, all under the guise of supervision with your professors and things. So you're never left kind of by yourself. Even after you graduate, there's so much help and so many resources and so many connections to stay connected and to continue to get help and learn. So yeah, just so many good things about the program.
Great, very good. Well, let's see. It looks like we have one question, and this is from Joan. Joan asked, please repeat the specifics, the requirements of spiritual direction. Thank you. Yeah, great question, Joan. So, the first thing, as far as the baseline requirement, we're looking for students that are ready to answer the call from God to become spiritual directors. And one thing is that it's important that every student that goes into this has had their own experience with their own spiritual director. And so if you have had a year of experience with a spiritual director, at least a year, then that's a great place to begin. If it's been more than 3 years since you've had a spiritual director, the door's not closed to you by any means. I want to highlight that. It might mean taking a little bit more time to regain that experience if it's been a little while. If right now you're in the search for a spiritual director for the first time, let me know. I'm always happy to help students in finding one. I have resources available. I do this for a lot of people. So even if it means that you're not ready to apply right now, I'm always happy to help people, even if it's just for their own benefit in their own spiritual life. But for those that have a recent experience, it's important that part's there. And also it's important that students that are going through the program continue to have spiritual direction. So that's another prerequisite. And then as far as the application goes, one would be doing the application form. That would be the first step. And again, it's on our website. If you want me to send it to you, I'm happy to do that. And then also the recommendations are needed. They're just Google forms that they would fill out. So they don't have to sit down and write letters, but rather they would fill out a short Google form and it would get sent to your application automatically. And then the last step would be a group interview. And this is something that only happens for an hour. It's always on a Monday night. And I always make sure to schedule it with a student on an evening that works for them. So again, very doable, always flexible. If there's any sort of accommodations that you need to have with this, let me know. I'm happy to see what we can do for you. That's a great question, Joan. Hopefully that answers that. If there are any other questions, I'd be happy to answer that, or Janet's here as well. Let's see, we have about a couple more minutes. Janet, I'll ask one, maybe I can ask one for you. I've asked so many so far, but I guess one more won't hurt. For some students, one question they have is, when I speak with them, they say, these are for the folks that are lay people that might not have a vocation in ministry. And sometimes they're a little bit hesitant to go into this because they might feel that spiritual direction is only for those that are consecrated religious or in the diaconate or something like that. What would you say to those students that are lay people, that this is not their vocation? Maybe they're married, or maybe they're working full time in a secular world. but still feel the call to become spiritual directors?
That's a great question. And honestly, let's face it, none of us are qualified, right? But God equips the called. He doesn't call the equipped. I think everybody in the program has felt that at one point. I'm not sure I can do this. I'm not sure I'm worthy. But the fact that he nudges and he calls, that's where the obedience comes in, right? And we do have, as lay people, a lot of life experience, a lot of relationship experience that can be so beneficial to people in spiritual direction. I have many young women that I direct who come to me because I am a mom and a wife and somebody that works in ministry and just a plain old lay person. I think sometimes the priests and the religious can be a little bit intimidating to certain kind of people, which is fine. So they are going to go to a lay director, and some people seek out lay spiritual directors. So yeah, don't ever think that you're not qualified. Again, if God's calling you, he's going to take care of that. So be bold.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that. I always like to highlight to people that Saint JP2, his first spiritual director, in helping him figure out that he was called to a life of ministry and in the priesthood, came from a layperson who was a spiritual director. So you never know who you're going to influence. One of our students that I did a webinar with recently, Father Devereaux, he is a priest. His spiritual director is a laywoman, and he found that to be very beneficial to him, just because it helped him grasp a new understanding of the people that he serves in the diaconate. So anyway, I hope this has been helpful for you. Again, if you feel like you're called to this, like Janet said, this is a great opportunity to take that first step and just applying. And again, I'm here to answer any questions that you have. So I think that's that. Janet, thank you so much for speaking with me. I really appreciate your time and being able to share with everyone about your role in the program.
Thanks, Greg. It was my pleasure. I appreciate it.
All right, thank you. All right, take care, everyone. Have a great night, and God bless.